Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another Genshin Impact video, and today I thought about starting a new series with the newly released Kazuha Kadahara, the anime sword-wielding badass. I thought about starting a new series where I take a look at every new star character, be it 4-star or 5-star, and do a good or bad. Is this character good or bad? Would I recommend him to any player? I'm going to look at a bunch of positives, a bunch of negatives, and then give a conclusive ending to the video where I recommend the character or I don't recommend the character. So we'll be starting off with Kazuha, the newly released 5-star anime sword-wielding badass. So first of all, let's touch on the subject of who is Kazuha and what does he do, how does he do it, and all that stuff. So, Kazuha is an anime one-handed sword damage dealer, a 5-star obviously. He can also be a sub DPS, kind of like DPS support. He's that kind of like a weird area where he can be a main DPS if you build him for it, but he can also be a very good sub DPS to DPS support. So the first positive I'd like to cover is the fluidity of his kit, the short cooldown, i.e. high activity kit that he has. His E ability is on a very short cooldown. That's even without the constellation, which is up on the screen right now. 10% reduction with a full refresh when you use his Q ability. You don't really need much energy recharge to get his Q back up to full or to have it usable. I on my right now, my Kazuha right now have very low energy recharge. Maybe 130%. That's not really much. And so even with all this, I don't have a Constellation 1, a low energy recharge, the general fluidity and kind of fast cooldown of his kit is extreme, and then you add the Constellation and a bit more energy recharge with higher level artifacts and all that stuff. He really reaches like an upper echelon of just really fluid to use, easy to use, everything works, connected, it's all connected, the stars are aligned. Honestly, it's amazing. For the second positive, I'd like to look at his actually just his E ability really. So his E ability is a hybrid, I'd say, between Venti and Sucrose. So if you missed out on getting Venti and you're unlucky enough to not have Sucrose through the many banners that she's been in, and you happen to get Kazuha, which this is all a very rare situation, I think you'd be very happy with what his E ability does. So with his E ability, you hold the ability down, he jumps up into the air, and then you press left click or whatever it is for consoles, and you cause him to do a slam attack. That slam attack then causes a black hole. Now, I'm willing to say and bet that this black hole that he does summon is very much stronger than Sucrose's black hole, but very much weaker than Venti's. It is very much weaker. Whether it's stronger than Sucrose's is up for debate, but as it currently stands, I'd say it is stronger because you can use it a lot more frequently, and you know it acts more like an actual black hole instead of kind of like a general sucking in. So the third positive that I'd like to get into is the fact that he's a sword user. Now this can be viewed as a positive or a negative. If you don't like sword users, then it's a negative or possibly negative. I've personally view it as a positive because there is a very large selection of swords to use, and you know, if you have a good one, you can, you know, very much invest in a Kazuha build. So first we'll get into two 5-stars that I'd recommend or would at least have a look at, which is the new Freedom Sworn Sword. This one I'd recommend just because it came with Kazuha and it's probably built around his whole kit. I'm not going to get into its whole ability thing because it's quite long, but it has Elemental Mastery, and I'll get into why Elemental Mastery is good for him in a later bit. But another sword I'd recommend is something like the Skyward Blade or maybe the Aquila Favonia. The Skyward Blade has energy recharge, so it's obviously not Elemental Mastery, but its ability is generally good. Going on to 4-star weapons, there's two that I'd recommend specifically, and that's something like the Ali Flash. This weapon comes with Elemental Mastery, so it goes into that reason why he is going to be good. But it also increases damage dealt by the character equipping this weapon by 12 to 24%. Taking damage disables it. So, you know, if you have something like a shield or you're just good at avoiding damage, this weapon could be really good. The second 4-star that I'd recommend is actually the crafted one, the Iron Sting. Now, crafted weapons, they're good or bad, it's up and down. But the reason I'd recommend it, again, it's for that elemental mastery. If you're really trying to go for the pinnacle of Kazuha's ability, or possibility, but you're on a budget of you're a free-to-play player or something like that, then the Iron Sting is actually a pretty decent weapon. So it has the elemental mastery, and its ability is dealing elemental damage, increases all damage by 6 to 12%, stacks up to 2 times, and obviously that's at refinement 1. These weapons can be really good onto Kazuha, and I'll get into the elemental mastery part in just a bit. And the final positive that I'd like to get into is just his usability. I mentioned this a bit at the start of the positives, but his general ease of use and easeability of just getting into as a character, obviously, is a bit of a broad term, but what I mean is, there's no weird kind of gimmicks to his character, so, or at least not as of yet. There's no animation cancels, there's no weird, bouncing or jump to cancel. There's none of that. He's just the character that you use, you attack enemies, you deal damage, and you get the job done. And personally, I find that to be a massive positive. So now getting into the negatives, the first negative that I'm going to mention is pretty much the most prominent and biggest one that you'll notice as an Anemo character. So Kazuha is again Anemo, and with this comes the lack of ability to deal massive amounts of damage. And what I mean by this is, when Hu Tao was released, people were doing 2 millions, people were doing 1 millions, just absolutely gargantuan numbers. With Kazuha, you're not going to be doing that. You can possibly help other characters achieve those numbers. So if you use Kazuha with his, constellations and his actual talent passives, you could possibly achieve other characters getting massive numbers, but him by himself will not be doing that numbers. I'm expecting the biggest numbers you'll get from him is something around 100k, 50k, in that area. You're not going to be seeing any millions to half millions, maybe even 2 million, none of that. And I think that's not a negative per se, but it's not a positive. If we look at the second negative that I've got for you guys today, is that his HP isn't high. My cousin is currently level 80, and he's about at a 16, 17k HP. I'm not expecting that to get much higher. And so that means that he's on the squishier end of the HP spectrum of all the characters. And in terms of just positive or negative, that's a pretty big negative. Easier to die, possibly die to burning ground, because, that's a thing. Getting random hits will slowly whittle away at his HP, and just dying in general will be easier for him comparatively to other characters. So the last negative that I have for you guys is not so much a negative, but I didn't really want to put it as a positive because it's just more so a unique way to use a character and play a character. And so that's with the elemental mastery stuff that I was mentioning earlier. So with Kazuha, he has 2 different things, his 4th ascension passive and one of his constellations that lets him use elemental mastery or his own elemental mastery stat in a different way to buff himself or his teammates. So Kazuha's 4th ascension passive, what it does is that upon triggering a swirl reaction, Kazuha will grant all party members 0.04% elemental damage bonus to the element absorbed by the swirl for every point of elemental mastery that Kazuha has. So pretty much this is the most support ability or most damage support ability or passive you can get. This is, it helps other characters become stronger. And so this is where that elemental mastery stacking build comes into play. On top of his 4th ascension talent, which uses elemental mastery in a different way, his 6th constellation, so it's his last constellation, so this is not early game, this is his final constellation. After using Kazuha Slash, or its Japanese name I'm assuming, Kazuha gains Anemo Infusion for 5 seconds. Additionally, each point of elemental mastery will increase the damage dealt by Kazuha's normal, charged, and plunging attack by 0.2%. Again, this is that elemental mastery stacking that I was mentioning earlier that will absolutely jack his damage up. And so for each point that you have, he just gets stronger and stronger by a fair chunk. I'm gonna say his passive, though, his fourth ascension passive boosts his team damage, whilst his constellation is more of a personal buff. So don't think they overlap in any way. His sixth constellation is a personal buff, whilst the fourth ascension passive is a kind of a team-wide buff. Now onto the final question is, would I recommend Kazuha as a character to aim for, or to be disappointed if you accidentally get him? First thing needs to be said is that he is an animo character, so again, if you're looking for that massive damage and easy clearing potential of, Spiral Abyss or any other content like that with the high-end damage required, then I maybe would recommend him. He's a character that can do that, but it's very much, you need specific things, you need very good artifacts, you need very good rolls, and you might need to, invest in maybe one constellation if you so want, if you don't have certain artifacts or something like that. He's a very dependent character on very strong and kind of specific things, but it's not impossible for him. Much like Zhao, he can do the final floor of Spiral Abyss, but it's, he needs to be jacked up. He needs to have a lot of things going for him, good artifacts, good weapon. All that needs to be, the stars need to align, pretty much is what I'm trying to get at here. So I maybe would recommend him. It would be much easier to build something like a Hu Tao or a Tartaglia, Diluc, and then get the job done with those, because they're just easy to build because they have that elemental reaction that they can cause to deal jacked up damage again. And like I mentioned before, much like Zhao, because they're the two most comparable characters right now, both being animo damage dealers, with constellations come great power with these two. Zhao reaches a new echelon of DPS with a certain constellation, and I feel it's going to be the same for Kazuha when he gets that 6th constellation, and also just the combination of all the other 5 constellations, but specifically the 6th one, in my honest opinion. He'll be reaching just a pretty high tier of damage. I'm not going to say he's going to be reaching anything supreme, and he's not going to reach these gargantuan numbers, but in terms of his DPS, his damage per second, it's going to be pretty high, and I'm looking forward to seeing what people create with Kazuha's 6th and final constellation. Getting onto if I would recommend him to the general player, and just if you want him for general use and you like the character, then sure, yes, 100%. The easiness of Kazuha in the open world content really exceeds every other character's kind of capabilities. Venti is a character that makes the open world a lot easier than normal, sucking up enemies, but Kazuha does that more frequently and at a pretty decent level. So I would recommend him if you like the character, you don't mind that he's an animo, and you want to do the open world a lot easier, and you're fine with a mediocre to moderately high amount of damage. That's when I'd 100% recommend him. Go for it. He's a worthwhile character. I've got him, and I'm using him quite frequently in the open world, and I'm enjoying him. But if you're looking for those massive numbers, you're looking for easy clears, you're looking for the millions of damage, then that's a maybe. That's a very much a maybe recommendation. If you guys did enjoy the video and you guys have something to say about these, positives and negatives, if you guys think they're wrong, leave a comment. Let's talk about it. I'm down for a conversation. I'm down to talking about this game. I'm down to talking about these characters. If you guys do want to see more of this series and you like this kind of series, hit the like button. Helps me a lot. And thank you again. Have a nice day. Catch you all on the next one, and peace out.